I've been running businesses for the past 4 years, and I know what it's like to go from zero to over $250,000 a month. In this video, I'm going to de-romanticize businesses because it's not sexy and it's not easy. Currently, my objective is that one day I hope I can have a normal 9-to-5 job in this entrepreneur journey. Frankly, I'm not some guru trying to sell you some generic course about how to make money. But if you apply what I teach you in this video, it's going to significantly reduce the number of sleepless nights that you'll experience in your entrepreneurship journey. So let's just jump right into it. So first things first, I want to start with how do you even find clients? Because I think that's the hardest part. And I'm going to first start with what doesn't work. Because as you can see, I'm constantly getting messages from people essentially selling me things. And as a business owner, I know you want to sell me something because at the end of the day, it is a transaction. I might have a need or a problem, and you obviously have a need or problem, which is you need to make money and you need to solve my problems. Hence, I give you money for you solving my problems. However, when I constantly get messages that sound the same, like this: "Hey Danny, glad to be connected. Hi Danny, recently Worky was recommended. Workyflow and this, not just a tool. Hi Danny, it's a pleasure. I was interested in this. Hey Danny, I saw you helped this." It's an immediate trigger. So very, very important concept about sales is that when you sell to someone, they will immediately feel resistance because we have been trained to think about that people want something from us. I wouldn't say want to take advantage, but they want something from us. And what we want to do is break that wall down and remove that fear or objection immediately. So one thing that I have noticed, because there are a few messages that actually have caught my interest, is, for example, "Hey, have you ever thought about starting your own business podcast? With your background, it would make sense. I'd love for you to meet our team that can take your marketing to the next level." I would switch or change that message just slightly, where you're almost offering the first 1 or 2 sessions for free. Because you know that if I am hooked and I end up loving the platform to build essentially an audience, because that's one of my needs right now. It's why I'm even creating this video. It would make it a lot easier, more enticing to say something along the lines of like, "Hey, given your background, I think you do really good in a business podcast. We're actually running a promotion for the end of the year where the first free podcast is free on us." At that point, I basically have no objections. You're currently solving a need for me, which is I want to build an audience, and there is no real commitment for that. So why I say this is that when you're first starting out, and let's say you have zero experience or close to zero experience, maybe you've gotten your certification and you've done a few fun pet projects, your first message needs to give the impression, especially when you don't have that repertoire of clients or you don't or skill sets, and you don't have that authority built out to say, "I've worked with hundreds if not thousands of clients." You gotta make it a no-brainer. So if I were reaching out to any client, I would write something along the lines like this. Now I'm going to tell you why this message would work even on someone like me. First of all, you're pointing out a problem that owner may actually be aware. Then you're being vulnerable and authentic with that person. "Hey, I'm new to website design and I'm just trying to get started." And you're posing it in such a way where it doesn't really hurt the owner. It's like, "Hey, would you be opposed?" Small concept. When you say, would you be against versus would you be opposed? Psychologically, it's easier for us to say no to something than yes something. So you're saying no in a positive light, meaning no, I wouldn't be opposed to it. So it just makes it a little bit easier. So would you be opposed to me building a website for you for free if you left me a review afterwards? So the only transaction that they need to leave you a review. And if you really want to take this a step further, would you be opposed to me building a website for you for free if you left me a review afterwards? And only if you love my work could you recommend me to 1 to 2 other people. And there you go. You can grab this message, go ahead and find a list of 10, 20, 30, 40 people, and go ahead and push this out to this message. Now, how do you actually find the 10, 20, 30, 40 people? Now, there are a few places that you can do this. First one is you can just go to Facebook, your text messages, anyone else. You can build an even more generic message that basically says, "Hey, I'm currently doing web design. I'm getting started. I just need some help. Happy to do free work as long as you guys leave me some reviews and leave me some recommendations." And then you just like mass message this to all of your contacts. The next option is if you do have a LinkedIn, you can actually reach out to your contacts there, because normally people on LinkedIn are on the more professional side. So they are a little bit more qualified when it comes to being leads. But within LinkedIn, you can actually go ahead and start searching for people. So when you go under my network, you can go ahead and find your connections, your group followings, or whatever. But what's really cool is that you can actually search for things. If I were to search up the word website, you can see that I'm getting posts about websites. That's cool. But what if I actually wanted to search up businesses with a specific criteria? Well, if I wanted to do, for example, pesticide, and then I can go ahead and do all filters, I can go ahead and find companies, location, let's do New York. So now that we're here, what we can do is, if you want to be really tailored with your message, you can say, hey, I'm actually in the same area as you, and I'm currently starting up a website consulting services, and I wanted to use a free website as long as you can recommend me to somebody else, whatever the message be. You can go ahead and search a pesticide, set up filters, and then once you're inside of this website, well, in this case, this person does have a website. Let's make sure it's actually good. Well, look, it's not good. So I would actually recommend reaching out to these people. Maybe they would like support in potentially a free website. And from there, you can go to the people and both go to the website to send them an email and also see if any of these people here are actually available to send a message. In this case, I would actually do the contact us and send an email to these people. I'm going to blur this information. Maybe I don't have permission to share this, but this is one of the ways that I would start. Now, the other way is if you have a little bit of money and you essentially want to quote unquote pay to win, you can go to a platform like Fiverr and Upwork. That's actually how I got started in my career. So in this case, as you can tell, I've been doing this for quite some time. I've done over $90,000. I'm expert vet, meaning that I'm top 1% in the platform for specifically operations consulting and automation development. So that's kind of what my agency does now. And how I got started was actually back in 2021, just before ChatGPT released. I wish I had ChatGPT at that point. It would have made it a little easier. Was I would go ahead under the find and work. And in here, I'll just start searching up. In this case, or at that time, I was using Notion. So Notion, as one of the services I provided, I went ahead and set the minimum to 0 and the maximum to just like 35 an hour. Super low. And I would do entry level and intermediate. Then the next thing I would do is I would search up number of proposals is 5 to 10 and less than 5. And the final thing that I would do was client history should have at least 1 to 9 hires. Usually when they have no hires, they are either scams or they aren't usually the best people to work with. At least once they've done 1 to 9 hires, you can see their history and if they have reviews, such as this. So in this case, I'm gonna go ahead and start searching up all of these and see if I can find one. Something like, so operations implementer, something that I tend to do. You execute, you don't strategize, ideate, philosophize. Your job is to make a messy mess, yada, yada, yada. I'm gonna read this, what good looks like, SOPs, skill set, SOP formatting, etc. Walk me through how you clean up Google Drive. How do you decide what not to build? What's your process for handing over work for founders? Show me an SOP you're proud of and why it works. Tell me, etc. Talent type independent. So let's say I click apply now. When you click apply, Upwork uses connects, and connects usually cost a few cents. But I would say that when I was first starting out and when I got my first job, it took me maybe like $30 to $40 worth of connects, and I'll explain why. When you connect and you start typing this out, you can actually bid to be on the top. So when bid, you essentially pay more money so you can be on the top rank, so that when people are applying, you can see the top 3 to 5 people that have applied. But how do you actually stand out across everything? A lot of times, especially when you have such a long message like this, it's going to tell you what they're looking for. And you want to tailor your message around that. So you want to be a problem solver and a problem finder. What are other things you can bring to the table that they haven't thought about? Now, I used to do this manually, but I can actually show you how to do this with ChatGPT now. I'm actually going to try to figure this on the spot. So let's see how well I do. In this case, I'm going to ask ChatGPT. And as I'm typing this out, now you need to start tailoring the message a little bit. I'll explain the logic on this in a second. But in this case, I'm going to give out some experience or examples of SOP building. Cool. Basically, I'm telling ChatGPT who you are, what you do, and what are you trying to help me solve for. So now that I have this very basic example, it's going to give me some ideas. So for example, something like this, I would actually change this. So ideally, I would have certification. So I would go ahead and grab something like this. Cover letter. I lead with a very strong approach. I would change this to I'm a certified expert in Notion and ClickUp. Cool. And then here I would start going into details of like how I would actually do this. But this is just one example. I'm going to go ahead and actually pull up my old messages so you can see some of my winning deals. Hopefully I can still find them because it's been many years. All right, here it is. I think at this point I was already using ChatGPT. I wonder, but here you go. Hey Ty, I understand the importance of maintaining high quality customer experiences and the impact that effective processes and workflows can have on your clients' results. As your business grows, it is crucial to ensure that you have the capacity to manage your processes and workflow effectively without compromising on quality. Again, this is when like ChatGPT started to come out. So what now sounds like a very standard ChatGPT answer wasn't very standard back then. So with that the case, my first thing is I'm really focusing on that first sentence on like, here is what you're asking for, and I'm setting the authority that I know what it is that you're asking for. Then I talk about the risk, like, is there potential if you do nothing? The risk of not taking action to optimize and improve your current processes could lead to inefficiencies and disruptions, negatively impacting your clients and your business. Now, obviously, this is before I had a formal business, so I was just coming up with things. I would kind of change the messaging to say that could lead to, instead of inefficiencies and disruptions, because that's kind of generic, is that could lead to potential clients leaving your services due to an inefficient approach to delivering your services, whatever it would be. But I would basically focus more on how this immediately impacts you and could lead you to lose some form of money, some monetary value. Then I added with saying like, so this is their current state. Like currently, here's the risk. And on top of that, I don't want to just focus on improving this now, but improving this in the future. So I went ahead and had the meeting, and eventually I started working with them. Same thing here. Here's another one. This one actually was Spanish. So I'm saying, hey, like in English. No, I said buenas tardes, so good afternoon. Went ahead and implemented this message, which led to another interview that unfortunately this time I didn't close. But this is two of the ways that you can go ahead, either for free or in a paid version, to start getting some leads that you could potentially work with. I personally recommend Upwork because it is pay to win, and you can go ahead and, outside of just implementing or investing your time to applying to these jobs, you can at least get more qualified leads more quickly within like 1 or 2 weeks to close your first client. Hence, coming back to my account, my very first client was this one. So help automate everything in Notion. And then eventually, and I started very cheap. That's the other thing. Like the first objective on Upwork is just to get your first batch, say like you're certified, you're a professional, and you know what you're doing. So I did these two for free, and then, or almost free. And then eventually it started building up from there, as you can tell. So that's kind of like how you find your clients. But once you are in the interview, how do you start converting them? Because it is one thing to start getting some form of lead pipeline inside of your business so you can start, getting these clients, but how do you actually tell them or communicate with them how you want to serve them and how you're better than everyone else? So kind of like I mentioned previously, when it comes to sales, most people sell themselves out of the deal. What I mean is, especially like in Upwork where people are actively saying, I have a need, can someone help me? A lot of people immediately focus on me, give me money. Rather than you, man, your situation really sucks, tell me more about it, and now let's build a solution towards it. And so what I mean is, a lot of people try too hard to sell. You can tell immediately who's a salesperson because they give you the vibe of like, oh, that's a salesman. They have that salesperson personality. But that's not actually good. A good salesperson doesn't really come across as salesy. And I say this because I've personally sold over $2.5 million worth of products, goods, and services in like just this year alone. And the biggest thing that I learned was, how do I connect with you on a more personal level? Like, how do I make sure that you can actually trust me as a guide that can show you the path towards the future state that tells you that you can win and that you can succeed and you can get out of this? Which leads me to the concept that you don't just have to be a problem solver, but you have to be a problem finder. And eventually you need to be able to essentially predict additional problems without them even knowing that. And that's what takes you to the next level. So what I mean is, for example, that person that was dealing with operational issues, the first thing is, I can find more problems. Well, you're struggling with operations, but what does that actually mean? Tell me more about what pieces of operations are actually missing. And then you start digging deep into the pain and the problems that they're experiencing. And as you go and find more and more things that they're dealing with, you start associating that to a dollar cost. Like, oh man, I had no idea that because your operations are missing, you can only service 10 instead of 15 clients. And you mentioned that because you have 5 clients and the current like average lifetime value for each of those clients, LTV, is like $3,000 to $4,000 that you could potentially be closing per month. Doesn't that mean that you're losing like $10,000 to $15,000 a month? You wouldn't say this, you're essentially guiding them, but I'm just giving you the example. And so as you start building that momentum to help them understand what they're missing out on, when you go ahead and go for the quote unquote hook or the punch or the knockout, whatever, that sounds terrible, don't say that. You can then have ammunition that makes it a lot easier to deal with objections if they come up. And throughout that process, what you want to do is you want to ask questions and keep asking a lot of questions. The person that asks the most questions is the one that controls the conversation, not the one that actually speaks. Actually, if you were to ever do any sales training, one of the first things that they try to measure is what is your percentage of speaking in relative to the customer. If you're speaking more than the customer, that's not a good sales conversation, unless it's some sort of like personalized demo where you're like presenting something to them. So all that to say, ask questions to dig deep into their pain. And once you're starting to dig into their pain, so they're understanding what their pain points are, you can start showing them the roadmap to the future or to the future state. And a very, very important concept is that yes, people can be pushed towards pleasure, but they are more willing to run away from pain than they are to run towards pleasure. But if you want to level up your sales experience, you have people run away from pain to pleasure. Hence why you build the current state and all the pain that they're suffering and leads them to the future state. So by asking those questions, you can focus on all the pains and dig deeper. So when they're saying like, oh wow, I had no idea that you're losing all this money, like what's that doing to you? I mean, if you're a business owner and you're trying to grow and really passionate about this, like what's it doing to you when you can't actually service these 5 or 10 more clients per month? And you can dig deeper by saying, well, man, I mean, in this case, I use business owner as well. Like, as a business owner myself, I want to make sure that I'm providing reliable and consistent work to my team members. So what's it doing to you that you're missing out on these potential 3 to 5 clients because the operations haven't been set yet? And you just have like that more interpersonal conversation with them that makes you feel like you authentically care for them. I think like the biggest thing that you can take away from this video, at least for sales piece, is like just genuinely care about what people are talking about, listen to them and say, here's the solution. Take it as you need to. But as you provide the solution for them, one key factor is you need to provide education. Explain to them concepts. For example, well, when it comes to operations, it's really important to have SOPs because SOPs allows you to create repeatable processes that can then be delegated out to other team members, which means that as you have more and more clients, you can start delegating out certain parts or full-on processes or departments even to certain team members so that you can keep scaling and enabling yourself to service more and more clients. So that's one example of education. And then you can go into concepts about SOPs. Well, do you know the difference between a procedure versus a process? And then you explain the definition of that and then you walk through that. Essentially what you want to just keep doing is building that ammunition for them to trust you. And then obviously you go for the close. You've built up all the trust and you've educated them and they feel like they hear you. And then you just say, well, cool, based on these things, it's costing you this amount of much. And this is what the investment is. It means that it's a simple ROI of like 3x, 5x. And then that's it. So that's one of the ways that you can really allow yourself to stand out from other people, because other people are gonna be like, I'm really good, I'm super certified, let's start working together, yada yada yada. Focus on the relationship first and then the money after. So once you start having your first few clients, you need to start focusing on profitability. And this is when it starts applying to when it's not just yourself, but when you start having about 5 to 10 team members. And I say this because I've actually had our team now scale to almost 40 people. And one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is that when you have not just yourself and you can only control yourself, how do you enable other people to be successful in their roles without just completely draining the bank? When you leave people to their own devices, they will do anything and everything they can to stay busy, especially if you have like hourly employees or team members rather than salaried team members. And vice versa, if you have salary team members, they'll try to get paid the maximal amount of time with the least amount of effort. So we need to put in guardrails that allows us to ensure that we are maximizing our team members' time. And then second to that, that any of the softwares and tools that they're using isn't duplicative and isn't just draining the bank. For example, I see this very common with our clients. They have a time tracking software, an HR software, then they use something like QuickBooks, which can do both of them. Then they use something like a Notion, and then a Monday.com, and then a ClickUp. And then for their CRM, they also use Salesforce, but then they also use HubSpot for some marketing initiatives. So they have they have 8 different softwares that could actually be reduced down to 3. And you might think, well, it's not that bad. But if Salesforce is like $80 a month per user, QuickBooks is like, well, that's actually a flat fee. But for example, like some tracking software is like $8 to $10 per person. Then your HR software is like a percentage of the salary. And then you have Monday and like ClickUp that are like anywhere from $20 to $30 an hour, per seat per month. At some point, you're going to notice that even with like 10 people, you're like wasting an extra $500 to $1,000 a month on extra software that could be minimized. And this is just a very small example, but $1,000 a month adds up. That's like $12,000 a year. And that's just like one example of many other ways. The other thing is that when it comes to applying tools for your team members, it's very easy to be caught up in something called the shiny object syndrome, where it feels that you want to keep applying and adding new softwares that are possibly better than what you've previously been using. But there is a cost associated to a concept called change management, which is where you change the process or the environment that a team member is in. And not only that, you may be potentially having that duplicative cost from the different softwares. So when you go ahead and start applying these new processes, try not to change for an entire year, which I know sounds very uncomfortable, and we even struggle with this. But what we've noticed is that we want to first learn to maximize the tools rather than constantly change it like the color of the month every single month. It costs way too much money to keep changing. Finally, let's say you are in the service industry. So for example, you're providing professional services, kind of like I said, the operations where you work on an hourly rate and you are actually asked to scope out a project. So for example, hey, Nate, I want you to build this automation scenario with make.com. How many hours do you think it is? It is better to overscope than to underscope and then be left with razor thin margins. That was honestly our biggest issue last year, was that we were focused on just increasing our closing ratio at the cost of profitability. So instead of properly quoting a project for, let's say, 35 hours, we would actually quote them more like 20 or 25 hours simply because we wanted to win the relationship first and then try to build up relationship afterwards where we can have like recurring services. What we've actually come to find out is that it sets the initial expectation for our work to be minimized, and any future work is also at that minimal rate. So what I mean is, if you close them for 15 hours and they see all the work that you did that actually took 30 hours, and then you try to sell them 20 or 30 hours afterwards, they're actually going to start questioning you and saying, well, if you were able to do this in 15 hours, why is it now taking 20 or 25 hours? Which leads to this spiral or this loop of just consistently servicing at razor thin margins. And so my biggest lesson for you is, if you start on the professional services side and you start having a team, it is much better to overscope and so under promise and over deliver by having a larger scope. So be comfortable with selling more hours rather than less hours. And it is okay to lose the deal, because at the end of the day, if you have healthier profit margins, it means that you'll still end up making the same amount of money, if not possibly more than what you initially did. It is a lot better to make $100,000 in profit from $500,000 than it is to make $100,000 in profit from $1 million of revenue. As we're scaling and growing, because I kept talking about, you have a team or it's yourself and you're now starting to learn how to scale to a team. How do you scale efficiently? Especially for us, where we started at like 15 team members about a year and a half ago, and now we're approaching almost 40. So we're approaching that 3x in size. There has to be a methodology in how you're doing that. What you can't do is just keep hiring people saying, okay, you figure it out. The biggest lesson we learned when it comes to hiring people is that we need SOPs. SOPs are not just a nice to have, they're a need to have. Because what happens is that there's a lot of information in your head, or almost like tribal knowledge, that can get misscrewed or misinformed and then spread out throughout your company. And it leads to improper behaviors, improper habits, and potentially a cost of like client relationship or just like cost of monies. So for example, when we started hiring our new team members, we don't just say, hey, go build out the solution. We now have an entire regiment and training curriculum with one of our head of operations or one of our quality managers that shows them how we build those solutions and why we're building them that way. So that when we come to, so example, because we specialize with Monday.com, instead of saying that clients can just stay on Pro, we actually teach them that they need to learn how to sell enterprise no matter what, because we wholeheartedly believe that the enterprise solution is the best solution. And the architecture that's required to build something on Pro versus enterprise are vastly different. So if we bring in a team member and they only ever believed in the Pro plan for whatever reason, they're going to go ahead and start building an improper solution that is not as good as the enterprise solution. So taking all this jargon, all I'm saying is build out SOPs that make the actions crystal clear and repeatable, because that's how you can start replicating yourself. An important concept about business is that you feel like you have to do everything, and it's an intuitive feeling because it can be hard to trust other people, but you need to learn how to do what you did previously. Why was it successful? Map it out, write it down so that other people and other team members can actually understand how to do that. So for example, when it comes to an SOP, sometimes it starts with just simple map. So what is step 1, step 2, and step 3? So the processes, right? In this case, it can be like one is meeting with client. So you show up to the meeting and then you may have a document. Review questionnaire with client, which may have several questions that we always need to ask them. Then the next step is do a walkthrough with client over their current setup. Afterwards, they may do something such as this. We can do an if statement. Does client have any other software to integrate? And then we can do if yes or if no. So if yes, map out other software and integration scenarios. Update questionnaire. Alrighty, so here's a simple example. I can't show our internal stuff, for NDA purpose and such, but essentially it's like while you're meeting with the client, you want to review the questionnaire with the client, do a walkthrough with the client's current setup. Does the client have any softwares that they want to integrate? I don't know why I didn't show that, but if you do, map out the other software, your questionnaire, and as well as your internal document to see what potential costs are. Run through what make.com is. That's our iPaaS solution that we use, and why we use for integrations rather than custom code. Then we grab all the meeting notes and send it over. And this is a yes or no. So this is the map. And then what we would do is actually start typing out a document that lists out every single step. And that document or SOP would also have like a sub SOP, for example, the questionnaires that should always be asked. And so that way we can document out every single step for the person so that we can make this repeatable. Because what we don't want to happen is that we have a team member run a meeting differently every single time. We want to make sure, especially as we keep going up market, that our services are always at a certain quality and that they're always consistent and essentially the same, so that when we go ahead and service other clients and or the same client, whether it's myself or any other team member, they get that same level of luxury or that same level of bespokeness when it comes to actually helping them out and getting them their solution built out. Hence why SOPs are super important. But a second really important benefit of SOPs, or even like mapping out your processes, is that you get to learn what the gaps are and where are the problems in your current processes. It's sometimes hard to know where are there potential fallacies or fault points or gaps if you don't first lay it out and it's all inside of your brain. So as a leader, when I come to sharing this with my team members and I want to train them, if I just tell them, they're not going to know. But if I break this down into dumb, easy examples or steps, and I have either not only a document, but even video recordings of me going of these examples or going through these different types of examples, then they can go ahead and take that and have a higher probability of chance of successfully executing what those instructions are. So you may now ask the question, well, that sounds great, Danny, but how do I actually do this in practice? Do I just send the document and they go ahead and start? Yes and no. Training is a gradient. It's not an on or off switch. So as you're learning to delegate this out, you have to train somebody. And usually that starts with something called the shadow session, where they literally just sit down and watch you work, and they can actually help you build out those SOPs with you, so they feel like they more internally understand the process. Then what you do is you start having them do a little bit of high level support. So for example, if I'm in a sales call and I have one of my team members shadowing me, what would first happen is that I do 2 to 3 different sessions of me doing the calls. In the same moment, I'm starting to build out those SOPs. And then the next like fourth or fifth call, I start having them take on the lead on a few parts. So for example, if we're doing an entire demo, I may go ahead and do 80% of the demo, and then the last 20% for like some of the technical nuances, I can give it to my team member. And then as he's progressing, I'm providing him feedback and updates on how he's doing well and not well. A very important concept when it comes to training is that it's very easy for us to tell people, don't do this, but it's just as equally important to not just don't do this, but also do this instead. I think Alex Hormozy made a video about this, about one of the guys that he had, that everyone hated the guy. And you can't tell someone to be like, don't be mean. You tell them, hey, can you change your habits to do this instead? Because if you don't, it'll come across in this fashion. So you need to give those clear instructions so that as you keep progressing in the responsibilities and how much delegating out to that team member, they can not just have the confidence, but they can have the consistency in executing those steps. So over time, it becomes more and more easy to keep handing it off until they fully own the process, and they always have the SOPs and documentation in hand that they can always reference to. And then what's really cool is that as you get them to be delegated and mastering that process, ideally they become better than you, and they can go ahead and up the SOP to be a V2 or a V3, so that your services keep evolving consistently across all your departments and across all your team members, but they're improving in a way that is more organic rather than you always being involved in every single step. Now, I've spoken a lot. I just want to make sure you understand that just kind of having a real talk about businesses is, I say this all the time. When it comes to running a business, I think there is a large misconception because people think that it's quite easy and straightforward. You just got to grind out for 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years. I've been doing this for 4 years, and my current objective is that I hope one day I can have a normal 9-to-5 job within my business. What does that mean? It means that for the first 2.5 to 3 years of my career, I didn't take weekends. I didn't take holidays. I would work through early mornings and late nights. I would sacrifice time with family and friends, and it's not fun, and it's not easy. My wife would know how many times I cried. Actually, this year was probably one of my hardest years before we finally took off, from being sub $1 million to multiple millions of dollars. And the first 3 months were hard because I thought we were going to get sued. I thought we were going to fail hitting the metrics. I thought certain team members were going to leave, and it was all piling up and falling on my plate and a few other team members' plates. And all I could do was just cry and keep pushing. That's how most businesses are run, at least initially. But I don't say this to demotivate you. I say this as a wake-up call because I want you to understand that I do still think it's worth it, and it was worth the sacrifice, because I can't foresee myself being in a normal 9-to-5 job. I mean, I've tried it. I went insane. Previously, I did my degree in aerospace engineering, and I tried being an engineer, and I just couldn't do it. After like 3 months, I was going insane, at least during my internships. And that led me to start attempting these businesses. So why I say this is that I think people even romanticize what the grind feels like. Like, it's like you just put on your headphones and you work 16 hours straight. And yeah, it can be kind of stressful, but it's super rewarding. Man, I didn't see any of the reward. I actually, when I went from going from a freelancer where I was working with just my clients and myself to actually building a business, I took nearly a 50% pay cut because I was just reinvesting everything back into business. And it wasn't until like 3 months ago, after many years, that I'm actually getting paid a decent salary, and I'm not constantly involved with every single day-to-day operations. I'm actually able to step back and actually start recording these videos and work on things that I'm more passionate about, like going out to Japan to meet the Japanese team for the software we sell, constantly going to North Carolina or New York, traveling and building relationships. And I say this because this is now my 4th attempt in a business. It's not my first, not my second, not my third, and I'm actually quite lucky that on my 4th attempt, this is actually starting to take off. And I want you to know that it is through the failures that I've learned a lot, but it is also through the sacrifice that has taught me to understand how should my time be invested? Because there's 2 schools of thoughts. One is, how do I maximize my time to bring the most impact possible? Or how do I just maximize the amount of volume and results that I can bring? And the difference is, one is, how do I sacrifice as much time to get there as quickly as possible? And the other one is, how do I maximize my time to get the most results without just killing myself? So essentially almost enjoying the journey. And what I would say is it depends on your drive and your hunger. And if I could take a step back and get the results that I've had, but maybe take me another year, that's probably the approach that I would take now. Man, at this point, I feel like I'm just yapping and like letting out like my feelings, but building a business worth it, it's just going to take a lot more sacrifices from you physically, emotionally, and spiritually than you ever imagined that it would. And you need to be aware of that before you fully commit to something. Fun fact, I'm very fortunate, and the reason I was even able to take these risks outside of my wife supporting me is that I actually live with my parents, or at my parents' house. And for those of you that have rent to pay or whatever, I have no idea if it's an option for you to move back home, but if you could, highly recommend it. And I think the most important lesson is, although I sacrificed a lot, I was very passionate about it, and I genuinely cared about what I was doing. If you're going to go through this journey with the sole objective of just making money, I will be shocked. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I will be shocked if you can go through this type of journey only to make money. It has to be something that you genuinely believe in. And the other thing is, running a business almost feels like you're getting kicked in the balls daily. And if you need to learn to embrace the discomfort. The stress and the discomfort is part of the journey, and it is to be expected. It's not like you're gonna work until one day you stop feeling the stress or discomfort. The stress simply evolves from what it was. And what you used to think was stressful is now something you know how to solve for. New things and new variables will arise that are out of your control, and you just have to be on your toes and be ready to fix it and solve it. So just please understand, you may not get it right the first time, and it's gonna be very hard, and that's okay. It's actually expected. So hopefully this video kind of gave you some content. It's just me essentially rambling for, at this point, 52 minutes instead of, man, I'm gonna have to have a late night today just to catch up on some work. But yeah, hopefully this video brought you some value. You can reach out to me if you have any questions about anything. I just want to make sure less people have to go through many years of figuring it out. And I hope that this video can at least give you one little tidbit of gold nugget information, whatever you want to call it, to at least reduce that even by a few days to a few weeks or even a few years, ideally. I'll be posting more videos to help out and kind of explain some other concepts like sales and how do you actually convert at a very high ratio. Point is, reach out to me. I'm happy to help. I want to make sure you don't suffer like I did, and you can go ahead and be successful in your business, ideally as soon as possible. Most importantly, hope you all have a wonderful Christmas, because it's Christmas. And yeah, God bless. Bye-bye.